Hey everybody, it's Matt. Welcome back to the Journey Church podcast. If you haven't yet, be sure to subscribe to this podcast so you can automatically get our weekly episodes. And you might want to go ahead and subscribe to our Journey YouTube channel as well. You'll find messages, music, interviews, inspiring stories, and more for you all right there. Now, I hope this episode helps you take your next step in following Jesus. I need to warn you as we start today that this message, maybe more than some messages, is going to require a lot of self-honesty. And you're like, well, why do you need to warn me of that? I'm always honest with myself. No, actually, you're not. Neither am I, okay? It is funny to me. This is a whole conversation for another time. But it's funny to me how we have such an extraordinary, uncanny ability to lie to ourselves and deceive ourselves. And if you're not aware of this, next time you're thinking about getting something that you want but you really shouldn't have or can't afford, just listen to yourself and what you do. We're all really good at arguing with ourselves and convincing ourselves we should do something we really shouldn't do. So that's why I say today's going to require a lot of self-honesty, but you're capable of handling that. And it starts right here at the beginning. I want to ask you a question. And what I want you to do, you do not have to ever tell anybody your answer to this question, but what I want you to do is I do not want you to edit the first thing that pops in your head, because that's what some of us tend to do. We're like, oh, that didn't sound good. Let me find another answer. I just want you to grab hold of whatever comes to your mind first, and there's a reason for that. As we go through this, I'll unpack what that is. So the question is simply this: what would make life good again for you? What comes to mind? What would make life good again for you? I'm going to guess, I don't know what your exact answer is. I'm going to guess it falls into one of three buckets, because this is how I typically answer this question for me. For some of you, if you're like me, you immediately thought of some solution. You could put it in a solution bucket. It's like, oh, well, life would be good again if this thing got fixed in this relationship, or if this family situation got better, or if this, work challenge or tension that's going on, if we could resolve that, or, whatever that may be. Or for some of you, it may have been, I'm under financial pressure. Boy, if I could just get out from under this financial pressure, fix this money thing, then life would be good again. So some of you probably thought immediately about a solution. I get that. I'm that way. Other times, if you're like me, some of you may have thought of a future-oriented answer. And all I mean by that is you immediately thought, well, if I can just get through this season or this stage or this phase, if depending on what's going on in your life, you're automatically thinking of some point in the future you've already identified. And it's like, all right, if I can just get there, everything's going to get better. Life's going to be good again. We say that all the time when we're so busy, don't we? It's like, oh, it's just a season. So it's a season. It's gone on for 12 years. It's so strange. But anyway, that's kind of how we think. So some of you may be thinking that way. Or some of you may have actually thought about the past. And the reason I say that is because you may have made some decisions in your past where you're having to deal with the consequences or the repercussions of those today. And it's not pleasant, and it's not fun, and it's put you in a position where life's not really that good because of what happened back there. And so what may have come to your mind, and we have all been here at some point, is you may have thought, oh, well, if I could just go back and undo or redo or change that, life would be good again. I can't, and so I'm not sure how I'm going to navigate through this. In some cases, it may be so rough, you're thinking, I don't know if it'll ever get better again. Well, boy, I would just go back and change this. Or if you're carrying shame and guilt, because it'd be like, if I could just go back and change that. Now, I don't know exactly what your answer was. It probably falls into one of those three buckets. But here's what I do know, because I'm just like you. Whether you're a Christian or not, doesn't matter if you believe in God or not, all of us are the same in a lot of ways. And one of the ways we're the same is, for the vast majority of us, our answer to that question is entirely self-focused, isn't it? In other words, you ask me that question, whatever I think about, whatever my answer is, it probably has everything to do with me. You're going, well, of course it does. Yeah, it's like if this would just get better for me, if this would just change for me, if I could just fix this for me. It's probably an answer that revolves completely around you. And it makes sense. It seems natural to assume that if I could just make things better for me, then life would be good again for me. But there is a possibility that assumption is not true. More on that in just a minute. So we are in week 3 of this series we've been in called Good Again. And the reason we're calling it Good Again is because all of us, after everything we've gone through over the last 3 years, you think about, all the global stuff, all the national stuff, all the local stuff, and then all your personal stuff. After everything we've been through, we are all ready for life to be good again. That is one of the things that we want more than anything else. And so we're all chasing that in a couple of different ways. Some of you are chasing that by disconnection. In other words, you're the ones who are like, I don't want to work in the office. I want to work from home. I want to stay away from people as much as possible. I want life to be good again. If I can keep people out of it, I think it might get better, So you're trying to handle it that way and just isolate yourself and, catch up that way and try to rest up that way. Others of you, you're trying to do what a lot of us have done, which is, I'm just going to go to all the destinations I didn't get to go to, and I'm going to make up for all the things I missed out on. And they have a term for it now called revenge travel, and that's what a lot of us have been doing. It's like, I'm just going to try to get involved in all the activities I couldn't do before, and we're just piling it on, But we think, I understand why, we think, if I can just do all those things or get to those places or whatever, life will be good again for me. And both of those options, both of those options could be solutions if, this has been the whole point of the series, both those options could be solutions if the thing that was standing in your way, if your greatest problem was that you're tired. If you're tired physically or you're tired mentally, then you take whichever one of those paths seems best to you, and it may just fix it. But I don't think life's not good for us because we're tired. I know that's part of it, but it's deeper. It's deeper. If we were just tired, we could take a few naps and everything would be okay. But it's deeper. We're not just tired. As we've been talking through this series, we're empty. Tired is physical and mental, but empty is emotional and spiritual. When I talk about empty, I'm saying our souls are empty. Our inner life is empty. Our inner reserves. And it should be. This is not a criticism. I'm not sure any of us could do a lot about it. But after everything we've been through over the last 3 years, it's just emptied everything out. It's taken all of the resilience that we have. And so now our souls are empty, but we're trying to fix an empty soul through disconnection, through isolation, through destinations. And we go do this stuff, and the problem is it's not actually solving the problem. We're better when we're experiencing that, but then when we get back from the trip, when we have to re-engage with people, we just feel empty again. You're like, I thought that would work. It didn't work. Maybe I need more time, whatever. But I think we're trying to solve a problem that's not actually the root problem. Because the only one who can fill our souls, if we're empty, the only one who can fill our souls is the one who created our souls. Which is why Jesus gave this unique invitation to all of his, the people in the first century and to all of us by extension. He said, here's what I want you to do. I want you to come to me. In other words, I want you to follow me. I want you to follow me. I want you to figure out what my way of life looks like. And then I want you to sync the rhythm of your life with my way of life. I want you to imitate it. Because, and here's why he invited us to do this. He says, because I'm going to make you a promise. I'm modeling for you the kind of life you need to live for life to be good again. And if you will just sync the rhythm of your life up with my way of life, you will find, and this was Jesus' words, you will find rest for your souls. In other words, that stuff that's empty inside of you, I'm going to fill it back up. You're going to find a rest for your souls. All you have to do is sync the rhythm of your life up with my way of life. And it'll happen. You'll find rest for your souls. You'll find rest for your souls because, and this is what we talked about last week, because you'll be at peace. You follow Jesus' way of life. You're going to learn how to be at peace with God. You're going to learn how to be at peace with others. And this is a challenge for some of us, but you're going to learn how to be at peace with yourself. And when you're at peace, life's good again, isn't it? The problem with this, and I touched on this last week, the problem for those of us who are Jesus followers, and if you're not, you just opt out of this part, but the problem for those of us who are Jesus followers is that seems pretty counterintuitive. So we actually don't want to fully follow Jesus and do everything Jesus said and fully sync the rhythm of our life with his way of life, because if we were being fully transparent, we think there's some things Jesus taught that if I were to do them would not make life good again for me, it would make life more difficult. If I do what he said there, I think it's going to make life harder, not better. And so we as Christians have a tendency to pick and choose, to cherry pick, if you will, the stuff that we think will be helpful, and then we ignore the stuff that's not. And the reason, again, is because we assume the way to make life good again, the answer to the question that you thought about just a few minutes ago, what definitely should revolve around you. For me to make life good again, it definitely has to revolve around me. But when Jesus says, hey, follow me, this is the tension. When he says, follow me, I'm going to show you how to make life good again. He actually leads you away from you in order to make life good for you. And that's so counterintuitive, it's just confusing to us. Now, if that's you and you struggle with that, and I think that's most of us who call ourselves Christians, here's the thing. We're not the only people to struggle. Jesus' first followers, his early disciples, They were so confused around this same concept as well. They struggled deeply with it. As a matter of fact, a big motivation, a big part of why they followed Jesus was because they assumed that one day he was going to become king of Israel, like in a literal, right there on the ground sense. He was going to set up a kingdom, overthrow Roman rule. They were certain he was the Messiah, which was their way of saying the king. And so what better person to follow and what better person to be friends with than the future king? Because once he set up his kingdom, well, that's going to benefit me. Who's he going to put in positions of power next to him? His best friends, of course. So there was a bit of an ulterior, what's in it for me motive behind why these guys originally followed Jesus so closely, why they spent so much time with him. And you see this in the last week of Jesus' life before his death. So the last 7 days before his crucifixion, they were actually extraordinary days if you're looking at it from the outside. Jesus and his followers had more momentum than they had experienced in 3 years. About 7 days before the crucifixion, Jesus was in a little town called Bethany, which was just a few miles outside Jerusalem. So everybody in Jerusalem knew what went on in Bethany. And while he was there, he raised a friend of his who had died. He brought him back to life, literally called out, and the guy walked out of the tomb, which just seems totally unbelievable, and I get that, except for the people who gave us this account. Well, there were over 100 witnesses there. There were so many people who had been to Lazarus' funeral, and then a few days later, they're talking to Lazarus. So they're like, we can't explain it. It's unexplainable, but it was undeniable to them. And as you can imagine, once they saw this dead man alive and they have a conversation with him, word spreads everywhere, all through Jerusalem, all through the surrounding area. Everybody knows what Jesus has done. And so there are hundreds of people who flock to see Jesus, to begin following him. They are so excited. There's so much momentum going on. And then leading up, right up to his crucifixion, Jesus and his disciples go into Jerusalem. Some of you may remember this story. It's what's called Palm Sunday today. They go into Jerusalem. And as they do, there are thousands of people lining the roads, celebrating Jesus as their Messiah, as their king. So they're all in line with Jesus' closest followers going, oh, yeah. This is who he is, and this is the moment. So there's all this momentum, okay? Which makes the story that I want to share with you today so remarkable to me. Because after they get in Jerusalem, Jesus, on the night that he eventually is arrested, some of you will remember this, he sits down with his disciples for a dinner that we now call the Last Supper or the last meal, but they didn't know it was the last meal before his death. They just thought they were having dinner again. They probably thought, with all this momentum going, we're going to be sitting down having dinner talking about how to maximize this momentum, how to make the most of what's happening here. Maybe this is a moment when it's all going to unfold. And John, who was in the room that night and saw and experienced everything that happened, John tells us what an extraordinary moment it became for all of them. Here's how he describes it. He says, Jesus knew, so they're sitting there in the room. Jesus knew, John says, that the hour had come for him to leave this world and go to the Father. Now, in the moment, even though Jesus had told all of them, hey, here's what's about to happen to me, none of them were listening. Because again, we all have a great way of deceiving ourselves, of lying to ourselves. So if I want everything to be positive and I've got this idea of, you're going to throw this out here and start this kingdom and I'm going to benefit from it, I'm not listening to any of the negative. And that's what they would do. They just ignore the negative, right? So John's writing this with the benefit of hindsight, with the benefit of some perspective. He's looking back going, okay, I didn't know it then, but sitting in the room, now I realize Jesus knew exactly what was about to happen. So everything that transpired in the next 48 hours, none of it was a surprise to Jesus. The pain, the suffering, the agony, the injustice, ultimately the cruel crucifixion. John goes, he was sitting there and we didn't realize it, but he realized exactly what was taking place, which makes this next statement John writes so remarkable. He says, having loved his own who were in the world, Jesus loved them to the end. This is John's way of going, wow, we were sitting in the room. He knew exactly what was in front of him, and yet his focus was not on himself. It was on loving us. Now, I ask myself, well, if I'm in that situation, what's on my mind? And it's on me, and it's on what I'm about to go through. But somehow Jesus was able to sit there in that moment and keep his focus on the people around him, not on himself. And then John gives us this interesting little bit of detail. He says the evening meal was in progress, so they're all eating there. And John didn't know this at the time again, but Jesus did. He says the devil had already prompted Judas, the son of Simon Iscariot, to betray Jesus, which causes me to go, well, surely Jesus isn't going to love Judas to the end, like he's talking about the other guys, but not Judas. Not if he knew the betrayer was sitting right there at the table with him. And then John tells us a little more insight. He says Jesus knew that the Father had put all things under his power, that he had come from God, and he was returning to God. Now, this is a lot of context John is giving us before he gets to what actually happened. But he's giving us all this context for a reason. And this seems a little out of place in the story until you see what happens next in the story. The reason John brings this up is he says, all right, again, we didn't understand it at the moment, but now looking back, we realize Jesus, in that moment, that night, knowing what lay ahead of him, Jesus, in that moment, that night, knowing his betrayer was sitting right there at the table with him. Jesus, in that moment, that night, knowing all the rest of us were going to abandon him. Jesus was still fully secure in who he was, and where he'd come from, and where he was going. Jesus was fully secure in his identity, in his purpose, and his place, in that moment, in the world. Now, why would John bring that up? Well, for this reason. Because the depth to which you can love is always determined by the extent to which you are secure. Or another way of saying this, it maybe is a little simpler. You can't love well if you're not secure in your identity. Let me try to explain it this way. We all know people who are arrogant. It's none of us in the room, is it? But we all know people. We all know people who are arrogant. And so you know this about arrogant people. Arrogant people never love well, do they? And the reason they don't love well is because no matter what situation or circumstance you're in, no matter what circle they're sitting in, they suck all of the spotlight and all the attention to themselves. Arrogant people are going to make sure everything is all about them. And as long as everything is focused on them, it is impossible for them to turn around and even think about anybody else in the circle, much less love them well. Because they're sucking it all in for themselves. We've all seen that. We know what that looks like. We know how ugly that can be. It's a form of pride that just drives us crazy. But here's what you may have never thought about. Insecure people also cannot love well. Because what do insecure people, and we've all experienced this personally, we've all felt this. What do insecure people do when they're in a circle or a situation and their insecurity starts to rattle around in their heart? Insecure people immediately think of themselves too, don't they? Insecure people start thinking, well, what are they thinking about me? And do they think I don't have what it takes? Or do they think I'm not smart enough too? Or wonder if they think... Insecure people are always focused on themselves as well. So as odd as it may seem, pride is a two-sided coin. Arrogance on one side, insecurity on the other. It's just two sides of the same coin because no matter which way we go, the focus is entirely on us. And so John tells us Jesus knew exactly who he was, where he was going, and who he'd come from. Because John wants to know the only way Jesus was able to love us in that moment is not because we were so lovable. He's going, no. He was able to love us in spite of us. He was able to love us in spite of everything he knew was coming in the next few hours for him because he was secure in his identity. He was secure in his purpose. He was secure in his place. And then John tells us the extraordinary thing that happened in the room that night that demonstrated that to them in a way that once they got it, they never forgot it. John says the meal's going on. And so Jesus got up. He took off his outer clothing and he wrapped a towel around his waist. And they're all looking at each other, scratching their heads like, he's not gonna know. I mean, what's he doing, you know? And they keep watching. And John says after that, he poured water into a basin. He began to wash his disciples' feet, drying them with the towel that was wrapped around him. Now, just to give you a little context, this was a common first century custom. And the reason they would do this is because all the roads were dirt roads. They were like us. They couldn't afford anything past gravel. That's all they could do. So you know, imagine that you're wearing sandals in gravel. Some of you are like, yeah, I did it this summer. I know it was a problem. So if you're wearing sandals through down dirt roads, your feet are going to get pretty filthy, right? Now, the difference in us and them fortunately, is in the first century, it wasn't just humans traveling those roads. It was dogs, and it was those demon-possessed cats, and it was all cats. If you're a cat lover, I'm sorry. But anyway, and it was goats, and it was sheep, and it was cows, you know. And so you're not just walking through human dirt. You're walking through, well, if you've ever followed a horse in a parade, you know you got to watch your step, right? You get it. So by the time you got to a home, your feet were pretty nasty. And so it was just common custom. If you were someone in the first century Jewish world of any means whatsoever, you would have a servant, or in some cases a slave, who was positioned at the front door, and as you and any guests walked in, they would immediately stoop down, they'd take a towel, they'd take a water basin, they'd wash your feet, they'd get all that off because you didn't want to track that in the house. So apparently this night, we're going to kind of fill in the gaps here, but apparently this night, we don't know who's home or what room Jesus and his disciples are having a meal in, but apparently as they go in, there is no servant at the door. And so you could imagine, every one of the disciples are looking over at the water and the towel thinking, somebody needs to wipe our feet before we go over here and eat. But it's not going to be me. And you know, because we're the same way, they were thinking, it should be, fill in the blank. You know, it's like, we know which one. And part of the thing that makes this so unique is if you read a little bit around this in John's account, John has told us that on the walk or on the way to Jerusalem, these same disciples had been arguing among themselves about who was the greatest. Like Jesus had just looked at them and said, I'm about to die. They'd skipped all that. They were assuming, hey, we're showing up at Jerusalem. He's going to set up the kingdom. They'd already started arguing. Well, who's the greatest? In other words, who's going to be Jesus' right-hand man? Who's going to be second in command? They're all arguing. Peter's like, it's me, you know. And they're like, well, no, you spout off and always give the wrong answers. It can't be you. And he's like, no, it's me. You know. So they're all arguing about this, trying to figure this all out. Which means when they go walking in this room, well, I mean, my goodness, if I've just made a case for why I should be the greatest, I can't turn around and humble myself and act like I'm the lowest and wash the feet of all these guys. There's just too much pride, too much insecurity, too much arrogance in all of them to do that. And so Jesus gives them a minute, and they'd rather start eating that meal with all that crap on their feet than to be humble enough to clean it off. And so imagine the drama in the room when God in human flesh, that's who they believed him to be. When God in human flesh stood up, grabbed a towel, grabbed some water, and they all realized, oh, is he really going to do that? That's not right. And so he comes to Peter. And poor Peter, it's like Jesus always gave Peter the first shot to be wrong. That's how it always worked out. So he comes to Peter to wash his feet. And John probably got a little joy in writing this. John tells us that he came to Peter, who said to him, Lord, are you going to wash my feet? Which is not really a question like, what are you doing? Peter knew what he was doing. This is more Peter saying, no. You're not going to wash my feet. No. I don't know what you're thinking, but you of all people in this room should not be the one doing it. Peter's going, I shouldn't either because I'm number 2. But you definitely shouldn't be doing it. We need to get down at the end, you know, the disciple that none of us can even remember their names anymore. He's number 12. That's who you should get to wash it, you know. It's not me. It's not me. I mean, Peter's just like, no, I'm done. We're not doing this. This is not the way to do it. And Jesus looks back at him and says, you don't realize now what I'm doing, Peter, but later you'll understand. Which was kind of Jesus' motto with all of them. You guys don't have a clue what I'm talking about. You hadn't gotten it yet, but one day it's all going to click. And Peter, again, just brushes right by it. So Peter gets very direct. He looks back at Jesus and he says, nope, you shall never wash my feet. I am not letting this happen, Jesus. And then Jesus looks back and says, well, unless I wash you, you have no part with me. Which was not his way of saying, if you don't let me wash your feet, then I'm booting you out of the group. He wasn't saying that. This was Jesus' way of saying, Peter, I keep inviting you to follow me. I keep inviting you to sync the rhythm of your life up with my way of life. You've been with me 24/7 for 3 years. You know how I am. You know what it looks like to live the way that I live, to treat people the way I treat people. But Peter, if you don't develop some humility, you're never going to be able to follow me. Because your insecurity, your arrogance, your pride will always stand in the way. It's impossible to follow Jesus without humility, without being the one, imagine this, they all thought it was beneath them to stoop down and to wash one another's feet. And there's the one person in the room who it was clearly beneath, and he's doing it. He's saying, until you get this kind of humility, you're not going to be able to follow me. You're not going to figure out or ever discover the life that I'm inviting you to live. And so, Peter's like, all right, wash my feet. He does. And then Jesus, imagine the drama in the room at that moment. Imagine, I'm sure you could hear a pin drop. Then Jesus goes to Andrew, washes his feet, goes to James, goes to John, goes to Matthew, goes to Bartholomew, goes to Nathaniel, goes to Thomas. And eventually he gets around to Judas. It's like, he's the one that should be washing feet. And Jesus, imagine this. He knows this is his betrayer. And he stoops down and he washes his feet anyway. He finishes, puts everything away back at the door. And at this point, you ever been in one of those moments where you knew you blew it? It's like, I am so embarrassed. I think that's how they felt in this moment. It's nobody's saying a word. Everybody's got their head down. Nobody's looking at anybody. No eye contact. It's like, oh man, we just blew it. I can't believe we let him do that. Can't believe we didn't do that for him. And then Jesus sits back down. And I love this. He decides he's going to try to connect some dots for them, knowing full well, I mean, he's worked with these guys, knowing full well it's going to take them a while to get it. I understand this in just a very small way because I used to teach high school math. And so there were a lot of times I stood up and said, let me teach y'all something knowing full well, this isn't going to connect, you know. They ain't going to get this today. This is kind of how Jesus was. He's like, they're not going to get this today, but I've got to explain this to them. And so he looks at them. He says, do you understand what I have done for you? Nope. Nope. I mean, we know you washed your feet. We can't figure out why. We don't understand. Jesus says, well, listen, let me explain. You call me teacher and Lord. In other words, you believe that I'm the Messiah, the long-awaited king. And rightly so, for that is what I am. You are not confused about my identity. You don't think a king would ever treat his subjects or serve his subjects this way. I'm just telling you, you're not confused about my identity. You're just confused about what a good king would do. He goes on. He says, now that I, your Lord and teacher, have washed your feet, you also should wash one another's feet. And they're thinking like, literally? You know, and he's saying, well, if necessary, but that's not the point. The point is, you should have this kind of humility. You should have this kind of servant's heart. You should demonstrate this kind of love towards one another. He says, I've set you an example that you should do as I have done for you. Let me tell you what Jesus showed us. It is the second key to a life that's good again. You've got to have purpose. You got to have a purpose that's bigger than and beyond you. In other words, you were created by God, according to Jesus, on purpose for a purpose, but that purpose is not yourself. That purpose is not to spend your entire life saying, well, what would make my life good again? Something for me, something for me, something for me. That road actually doesn't get you where you want to go. Listen, life that's good again, it requires leaving the land of what's in it for me. If you really want your life to be good again, you've got to learn how to step across the border of what's in it for me, what's in it for me. And learn how to follow Jesus. He never leads you in the direction of focusing on you first. He always leads you across the border into a land where he goes, okay, you make it about others first. You make it about others first. Here's your purpose. You want to find a purpose? Here's your purpose. You want to find meaning, significance, and fulfillment in life? Here's how you find it. Not by getting everything you want, not by taking care of all your stuff. That stuff ends up being empty. It never lasts. You want to find your purpose? You make your life about putting others before yourself. That's how you do it. That's what it looks like. It can't be what's in it for me. To which we all push back and go, yeah, but if I make it about others all the time, then who's going to take care of me? And Jesus says, oh, I will. I will. I'll take care of you. You go make it about others. So as we wrap up, just two things and we'll close. One, have you put any habits in your life, if you're a Jesus follower especially, but this will work for anybody, have you put any habits in your life to help you develop a them before you mentality? Have you put any habits in your life that God can use to change your heart where you don't automatically, naturally, immediately go, what's in it for me? What's in it for me? What's in it for me? This is why those of you who serve here, listen, this is why I think it's so important. Sure, God uses you to impact lives and impact other people, and that's wonderful. But it's a habit. It's a habit. And it will not solve this. It will not completely change your heart. Well, if I just serve regularly at church, I'll all be good. No. But what it is you have a regular time in your routine every month where you're reminded, oh yeah, make it about somebody else, not me. It's a habit that you can build on with another habit and another habit until this becomes who you are and what you do. But it requires humility and security to know God's going to take care of me. I'm his son or his daughter. I don't have to worry about me. I can just focus on the person beside me. If you haven't taken that step, there was a card in the seat when you came. And the reason we're giving you that card, you can fill it out or you can scan the QR code. It doesn't matter which way you do it. But if you don't have that habit in your life, I hope you'll at least explore serving here because you need that habit for you. You need that habit to begin to move your heart away from what's in it for me, across the border into I'm going to make it about you, not me. Just fill a card out. Because listen, you can't follow Jesus and I can't follow Jesus and make it about us. Because our leader said, I did not come to be served, but to serve and to give my life away as a ransom for everyone. So following Jesus, he leads us away from ourselves. But in following him away from ourselves, we actually find a life that's best for ourselves. That's what purpose does. And finally, as I close, if you have never accepted the extraordinary gift of forgiveness that God's given you, if you're not secure in who you are and the fact that God created you and he loves you and he wants you to be a part of his family, if you're not secure in that, oh my gosh, it's why Jesus came. The king who deserved to be served all of us, gave everything for you and me, demonstrated the ultimate act of humility when he died on a cross for us. And the beauty of it is, he says, all right, I'm offering you forgiveness. I'm offering you a place in my family. I've done everything I can do. All you have to do is accept it. And so today, as we wrap up, I want to invite you to accept it. That's all you have to do. There's nothing magical about it. You don't have to earn it. You just say, Jesus, I'm ready to accept your forgiveness. As best I know how, I'm ready to follow you. I want to be a part of your family. And he says, done deal. That simply. Life that's good again, it starts by following him away from ourselves. But in the course of doing that, we actually find ourselves. Let me pray for us. Father, for those who have never experienced your grace and your forgiveness, my prayer and my hope is that they'll experience that today, that they'll have enough humility to just tell you, I need it. That's all it takes. Thank you for making it so simple for us, and thank you for wanting a relationship with us so deeply that you would give everything to make it possible. And for those of us who do follow you, if we're honest, we're way more concerned about what's in it for ourselves. Would you help us to put the habits in our life that we need to put, that you can use to begin to change us and help us to better follow you? Because it can't be all about us and still follow you at the same time. That just doesn't work. Help us trust you enough to follow you away from ourselves, and in the process, we will find the life that you have promised for us. And it's in your name we pray. Amen. Hey, if you'd like more content like this, subscribe to our YouTube channel and download our Journey app to access all of our recent message content. And our app is the easiest way to share this content with friends. For more information on our church or to find our app or our YouTube channel, just visit journeycalway.com. That's journeycalway.com. Thanks for listening.